Hello, hello, hello. How are you guys doing today? Welcome to Peter Watches TV, where I watch all the TV shows. I watch all the trending shows on Netflix and Apple and Paramount and Peacock and everywhere else, Amazon as well. I watch all the reality TV, Big Brother, The Housewives, The Bachelorette. I have a bunch of videos coming up about those things, those shows. And I also watch all the true crime over here. Now, I'm finding that I have to turn around the very next day after I watch a true crime show or true crime documentary or series, and I have to turn around and do the video the very next day. Or a lot of what I thought about the show or a lot of what I know about the show, I forget over the course of a couple days, especially as many TV shows as I watch. So I wanted to get on here today, and I wanted to make sure that I did a reaction to the two-part documentary on Netflix called Into the Fire that I just finished last night. But after I finished it, I then watched like 11 episodes of Sister Wives because I'm trying to get done with Sister Wives before, as you probably know from my last two videos, I'm trying to get done with Sister Wives before the premiere on the 19th, but I wanted to do this reaction because I was so impressed with this documentary. So I didn't even know that this documentary was coming out, and somebody that watches a lot of my videos, Emily, hey Emily, how are you? She DM'd me the other night, and she was like, have you seen Into the Fire? And I hadn't even heard of it before, and she said, you know, it's something about it's new on Netflix or whatever, you should watch it. And so I went over to Netflix. People recommend shows to me all the time, and I will tell you, if you recommend a true crime show to me that I haven't heard of or I haven't watched before, and I've watched pretty much almost everything that's out there, I will like Google search it immediately and then add it to my list if I haven't seen it, because I love watching true crime. I love reacting to true crime. I love talking about true crime. So that's why I have a true crime book club that I run with my good Judy Mel, and it's linked below. So if you want to join Mel and I for the true crime book club, all you have to do is join the Facebook group. It's linked below. So anyway, and also I do all the announcements on my BookTube channel, which is called Peter Likes Books. So if you want to follow over there, I talk about all the true crime books over there, and then we do a live stream once a month. So I love talking about and watching new true crime, especially about stories that I don't really know. And so different, where you really don't know what's going on in the show are probably the ones that are the most interesting to me if you want to know the truth. So I went and I looked at this, and I was trying to get all these different shows, you know, done and watched in time for the Sister Wives premiere and things like that, and I looked, and I saw that this was a two-part series. And whenever I just see like when it's 2 episodes or 3 episodes, I always Google search like how many episodes will this be total, because I want to make sure that like what's up is up, that they're not releasing 1 episode a week or something like that. And I saw that it was a conclusive 2-part documentary. Each episode is about an hour and 15, hour and 20 minutes. And I also saw that it was produced by Charlize Theron, and she's actually come out and done interviews about this and talked about this. And I was like, okay, this is really interesting. Like, I think I want to watch this, and I also need a break from Sister Wives. So I was like, I'm just going to watch like 15 or 20 minutes of this. And that night, I ended up, so that would have been Thursday night, I ended up watching the whole first episode of the documentary, and then it ends on such a cliffhanger. It ends on like, you have no idea what's going to happen next. I was like, okay, if I don't go to bed now, I'm going to be up until like, 6:30 or something, which in all honesty with my TV watching schedule is really nothing for me. But I was like, no, I've got a bunch of things to do tomorrow. I've got, appointments and stuff like that. So I've got to go to bed. So I went to bed, and then I watched the second part last night. I was so blown away by this documentary. It was, number one, these are kind of the things that I rate a true crime documentary on. Because one of the things that for me is like, there'll be a certain case, and we're seeing this like right now with the Scott Peterson, Lacey Peterson situation, because Scott Peterson, working with the Los Angeles Innocence Project to try to like, get his case overturned and things like that. And so you start seeing a lot of documentaries come out on a lot of different streaming services or by a lot of different production companies, and they all kind of tell a different side of the story, right? And to be honest with you, it's interesting, like when you watch them, I don't know, they're very opinionated coming from the point of view of the producer and things like that. And so I tend to like just get kind of burnt out when there's like, it's like the Fire Festival, there was like 4 documentaries that were put out about that. By the end of the second one, I was like, I can't do this anymore. Like, I don't care that deeply about the Fire Festival. I'm not that invested, to continue to watch these things. So I like a documentary that's about a case that I don't know anything about, right? Or if it's a case that I'm interested in, but they've never done a documentary before, right? Like, I think if you've watched my drama channel, I've covered very extensively my interest and my interaction with the Herb Baumeister Fox Hollow Farms case that happened in Indianapolis. Herb Baumeister killed, they think it's now like 35, 40 gay men in Indianapolis. He was also the I-70 killer. And there's never really been a great documentary that's been done about it. There's been The Haunting at Fox Hollow Farms, which was subpar. It was okay. I think it's very scary, but I don't think it was a well-done documentary. I think Ghost Adventures went there or whatever. Zach Bagans went there. A couple other people have done things on it, but there haven't been really great. Well, actually, our news station here in town a year ago, they did a very conclusive, fantastic documentary about two of the victims that have been found. Because they're still, his killing spree ended in 1996 when he took his life, and they're still out there on the property. They're still finding bones and identifying people today in 2024. So that case is so interesting to me. It's really interesting to me that they haven't made a documentary about it. Interestingly enough, because I have talked about it online so much, I have been contacted by several different sources about what do I know about it and like leading people in certain directions. So I do think that there is a documentary that will be coming out about that in the near future. So for me, it's like, if it's a case that hasn't really ever been covered and there's not really a good documentary about it, first of all, that's what's really interesting to me. Number two, it's the telling of the story, right? Like, do they interview a lot of people? I love like the shows like Worst Ex Ever and whatever, but like the cartoons of it, I don't love that. And so I love the sit down with a cup of coffee. I was talking about this in my vlog last night. Like, when I'm watching a true crime documentary and they're sitting at a kitchen table drinking a cup of coffee, it like makes me want to have a cup of coffee because I'm like so into it, right? And I love when they interview these people and they're just very, very real people. And that's the second part for me, is like, are they telling the story from the people's points of view? Or are they going in there and they're just showing a bunch of court footage and they're just telling a documentary? Like, or just telling the documents of it. Like, that's not that interesting to me. I want to hear it from the people. And the third part to me is, do they pay homage to the victim? Like, that is really, really important to me. This documentary did all of those things. This documentary, it was a case that I knew nothing about. It also interviewed all the people. It had fantastic people that they were interviewing in it. It interviewed people all over. And it also reached out to people that didn't want to be interviewed about it. And it paid extreme homage to the victims in it. And there were two main victims. Well, there was 3 or 4 victims. One of them was alive that they go in and they talk about. So at this point, if you have not watched Into the Fire, it just came out last week. I think it came out on the 12th. If you haven't watched it, I am going to talk about what happens in the documentary. So if you want to stop watching this video now and you want to go watch the documentary, I totally understand. So after this point, I'm going to be spoiling things in the video. So what the documentary is about this woman, and her name is Kathy Tricorian, and I believe I was reading an interview, and she's 66. When she was 17 years old, she gave birth to a daughter who she named Alexis. I think at 10 months old, of the baby being 10 months old, she gave the daughter up for adoption because she was really struggling taking care of her and things like that. And so she was promised that they had a fantastic family that she could adopt it to. This family was going to give this child everything that she couldn't give it at 17 years old. And so she really didn't want to give her daughter up for adoption, but she did because she thought this family could provide for her what she couldn't provide for it. So she gave her daughter up for adoption. It was a closed adoption. Through the years, she thought that at some point, like when her daughter turned 18 or whatever, that when the daughter could find out, that about the information of her adoption, that she would reach out to her and that maybe she would try to connect with her biological mother. That never happened. What happened was 30 years later, Kathy, the biological mother, was reached out to by the adoption agency who was working in conjunction with a police department in Hamilton, Michigan, that had, I think it was in Hamilton, Michigan, maybe it was across the lake, that had identified a body that they thought was of her biological daughter that had gone missing like 25 years before. And so they needed a DNA sample from her to identify whether or not this body was her, which it ended up not being her daughter. But that was kind of what started this whole journey and exploration for her, that Kathy went on this whole storyline of, I've got to find out what happened to my biological daughter. Now, I think one of the things that's really, really, I've had a lot of friends of mine that have been adopted. I've had a lot of friends of mine that have given children up for adoption and things like that. I've actually had a lot of friends of mine that have reconnected with their biological parents and things like that. What's interesting about this story is, and I was reading a lot of things about it, and there's different mixed messages. I think that one of the things that you have to understand that I don't think they portrayed this well, and they mention it, and and Kathy talks about it, but they don't do, I don't think, a fantastic job of describing the pain that she has in thinking that her daughter all these years was living in a fantastic home, being raised by fantastic parents in a home that she at that time couldn't give her. And I think that's really for her what it is. I think that's being misconstrued, and people are like, a lot of people are like, well, what's your investment? Like, this was your biological daughter that you gave up for adoption. I've seen that a lot online. Well, the thing is that she reluctantly gave her up for adoption because she couldn't give her the life that she wanted her to have at 17 years old. So she selflessly gave her up for adoption to a family that she thought was fantastic, to later find out that her daughter was being sexually abused, and there's a lot of essay and other things in this documentary. So if that's a trigger warning, that's a trigger issue for you, I give you a warning right now that I probably wouldn't watch this. And that the mother just kind of turns a side eye, that the mother and the father are both really nasty and not very nice to her daughter. Her daughter's name is Aundria Bowman, and she went missing when she was 14 years old. So she finds out about, this DNA thing, and then she starts this Facebook group. And she starts the Facebook group, and it's called something like Information About Aundria Bowman Missing at 14 or something like that. And she starts getting all these messages right away from people reaching out to her, saying that they were friends with Aundria and they knew her in high school and stuff. So she starts having communications with these people, which is interesting because the biological mother and father at that time have never done this, okay? They didn't even really put out that many missing posters and things like that. They really never did anything for the investigation. They just said that they thought she, left because she stole money from them, and she was just a wild child, and she was really resistant. Interestingly, later you find out that she came to her mother and she told her mother that her father was molesting her. Her mother didn't believe her, so they took her to the pastor of the church that they went to. I mean, can you just imagine the fear of going through that? And so the pastor was basically saying, you're going to ruin your dad's life by saying these things, and she retracted her statements, okay? Sitting in a room with her mother, her father who's abusing her, her mother who believes her father. I mean, this mother was this is such a good example of when you hear about the BTK killer's wife that she saw the news reports and never connected it, and you wonder how do serial killers' wives how do they not see it? This woman didn't only not see it, she witnessed things, she saw things, and at the end of it, she knew things that he had dismembered their daughter's body, and she still loved him. She still made excuses for him. His wife, Brenda, still made excuses for him, saying things like, well, people are saying that he dismembered her, but that didn't happen until after she was dead. I mean, it's so insane this documentary is insanity. So the first part is really about Kathy and Kathy's husband, I think his name is Ed, and he's fantastic as well. And they take this RV and they go back to, because they're living in California, they go to, I think they're living in California, they go to Michigan and they start interviewing all his friends. One of the people that, okay, so what happens is, so they go start interviewing a lot of these people and trying to figure out what's going to happen. She comes up with this theory that the father has something to do with this, okay? And part of her theory is based on, she talks to this woman whose name is Meta, and Meta is a very important part of this story. It's really kind of sad because her allegations never really get confirmed whatsoever. But I believe she was 6 years old, and when she was 6 years old, she was abducted by this man in a red pickup truck, and she was taken to the woods. She was tied to a tree. He SA'd her, and then because a dog was running through the woods, he left because he was afraid he was going to get caught. He left her tied to a tree naked, and then she untied herself, and then that's how she was found. When it was reported to the police, she even did a drawing that looks exactly like Dennis Bowman, who was the father of Aundria Bowman that went missing. And her case, at the end, they said there's nothing for them to confirm it. I mean, the man drove a red pickup truck. I mean, she identified him. She gave a sketch composite. I mean, I felt so bad for this Meta girl. And that was the thing. I feel often when I watch these documentaries, it's they always kind of have to settle, right? It's a lot of these killers and people like that. It's yes, they get sentenced. I mean, he was sentenced to 2 life sentences, 30 to 50 years. I mean, he's old enough that he'll never see the light of day. He'll never be out of prison again. But at the same time, it's these people always kind of have to settle. At the end of it, Meta says, well, they didn't have enough to get him on my case, basically, but he's still locked up. And I'm but that's, okay, but you deserve justice too. You deserve justice for what happened to you. Sure, all these other things happen, but you deserve justice too. So Kathy starts really signaling in on this Dennis guy, okay? And what happens is, Meta is part of this Facebook group, okay, because she looks up missing people in Michigan because she thinks if what happened to her might have happened to somebody else. And she comes along Kathy's Facebook page. So when she's going to Kathy's Facebook page, she starts looking up Aundria Bowman. When she sees Aundria Bowman, she looks up a family picture. When she sees Aundria Bowman's father, Dennis Bowman, standing behind her, she's like, that's the man that took me to the woods, okay? So then she later hears the tape, and when she hears the tape of the interview, she's like, that's the man. You never forget a voice, right? Which is so true with abuse victims, like, that you don't ever forget the voice. And so she starts working with Kathy, and her and Kathy become very, very close. And so that's when Kathy starts doing the investigation in Michigan. Kathy, it starts interviewing all these people, but she, like, will not leave the Bowmans alone. Like, she walks in front of their house. Now, as soon as Aundria went missing at 14 years old, like, a couple months later, they moved, like, 5 miles away into this other house, okay? Which is interesting because her friends are like, well, if Aundria came back, she wouldn't know where to go, right? Like, they're just were done at that point. And so Kathy is convinced that Aundria is buried in the backyard of the new house. Well, nobody wants to believe her because they're like, they didn't live in that house when she was buried. She's like, I know she's back there. I know she's back in that backyard. In fact, she does this, like, flyover thing, and she compares it to Google Earth, and she knows, like, she's like, this is exactly where she's buried. She's like, the earth is changing, he's hiding something, whatever. I mean, this woman, Kathy Tricorian, I mean, I'm telling you right now, if anything ever happens to me, I want her on my side because, I mean, she says at the end of it, she says, I think my mission is to solve the crimes of women that are, like, crying out to me. And I was like, you are I mean, she is relentless. She is absolutely relentless. And I love her for this. And so she continues to harass these people, right? Well, because she continues to harass them, they go to the police, and they're like, she's harassing us and whatever. So they now have this other case that happened in Norfolk, Virginia, which is incidentally where Aundria was originally adopted out of. And so he had been stationed there. And they have this case that Dennis Bowman had been stationed there and was going back and forth. And they have this case of this woman that was murdered there in 1980. And they have DNA samples. Well, DNA samples in 1980 wouldn't do anything, but today they will. And so they're getting him to drink while he's talking about Kathy and how she's harassing him. And they take the DNA from the cup, and it's a 100% match to the DNA, the sperm sample on the bedspread. So then they have him for this murder in Norfolk, Virginia, and then they lock him up. The whole second, I mean, that's how the first episode ends. It's him sitting in this room, and they're like, he's like, the police officer, the detective is like, do you know who I am? He's like, no. And he goes, I'm the guy that you've been looking over your shoulder for the last 40 years. I mean, that's how the first episode ends. It is fantastically done. The second episode is about them getting on these charges for this woman in Norfolk, Virginia, and how her family was relentless as well and not letting go of this whole case. And I mean, it just was so well done. Like, her cousin talks all through the show, and it's fantastic. And they talk about her dad and things like that. And they do such a great job of humanizing the victims. And so it goes on and on and on, and then Brenda, the wife, just completely stands by. I mean, there's this one scene about where they go. So Kathy at one point is working basically with this citizen detective guy out of California. I think his name's Caleb. And they go to this, like, missing persons convention, and Brenda, the adoptive mother, comes in there, and she's like, I just want you all to know she has 2 mothers. Well, Kathy, like, starts going off on her, and your husband, you're telling one side of the story. Your husband murdered my daughter and all this kind of stuff. And she's like, she's not your daughter. You gave her up for adoption. I mean, they even say that. They even say that in the telephone calls from prison. Brenda and Dennis Bowman, they're like, she didn't even care about her. She gave her up for adoption. I mean, it's so sick how they talk about their own daughter. I mean, it's so sad, right? And so Kathy continues to believe that she's buried in the backyard. Well, they can't really find out anything. They have Dennis locked up. They get him on a thing. And so finally, long story short, okay, Dennis finally admits that she's been dead since day one. He tells his wife, he's like, they pull her in there, and he tells her, you know, like, we got into a fight. She was taking money. She was running away. I hit her. She fell down the stairs. I didn't do anything. She was dead when she fell down the stairs. So I buried her. First, he said something about, he put her in this barrel, and then he pushed her out to the side of the road, and she went away with the trash the next day. Then he says he buried her with all this, like, cinnamon and clove, and it was like this ritual kind of thing. It was weird. And wrapped her in this, like, white thing and tied her with these red, it was so weird what he came up with. And then he buried her in this graveyard, and he passed her 100 times and all this kind of stuff. Well, finally, his wife, they kind of, like, coerce his wife into, like, getting something out of him, because if he doesn't get charged with the case of Aundria Bowman, and they can't charge him without a body or remains, they can't really get him for it. Then he's going to go to Virginia. If he goes to Virginia, what it means is that Brenda can't continue to visit him in prison. So they basically lie to both Brenda and Dennis, and they say, if we can get you an Aundria Bowman, then you can go back, you can stay in Michigan for your life, and then Brenda can visit you in prison, and you guys can have some kind of life. So finally he says to her, she's been buried behind the house the whole time. And you're watching it, and you're like, oh my God, Kathy knew. She's literally buried in the exact spot that Kathy thought she was buried in all this time. And what he did was, he kept her in a barrel for like three years or 3 months or something, and then when they moved, he took the barrel and he dug it and put it in the ground and then covered it up and all that kind of stuff. And they find it out because they find like a peppermint patty, peppermint mint, patty mint wrapper, and it says 1980. So it places, like, it dates like when so they know, or 1989. So they know that she hasn't been like missing for 6 months and then, or a year or whatever. Like she was dead. She never left the house. It's so sad and it's so tragic. Then he gets sentenced to like 30 to 50 years in life. The prosecutor, who's fantastic, she's like, the whole thing was about him wanting to have control. He's so manipulative with the police. It kind of reminded me of watching stuff about John Wayne Gacy and reading about John Wayne Gacy, about how manipulative he was with the police. Dennis Bowman is very, very manipulative with the police. He comes out later and he talks about, well, he comes out after he gets sentenced, and he talks about how he has assaulted women in California, assaulted women here, assaulted women there. I mean, they think he might be one of the most severe serial sex offender, violent crime killers in our country, but he's just not being honest about anything, right? So they tell Brenda and his wife and him that he'll get to go back, or he'll get to stay in Michigan so she can have visitation with him, but the prosecutor's like, no, he has tried to have control over this from the very beginning, so we're sending him back to Virginia where he has no control, and that's what they do. And I was like, yes, thank God. But then at the very end of it, Brenda, who has really never given a shit about her own daughter anyway, because even after she finds out that her husband murdered her daughter, cut up her daughter, buried her daughter behind the house, and lied to her for 40 years, she continues to stand behind her own husband. So Kathy wants the remains, okay? Kathy wants all the remains. Well, Brenda has the rights to the remains, so she has them cremated. And I know it seems like a very, like, nice gesture at the end of this documentary, but she gives half of the ashes to Kathy, and Kathy loses it. Kathy's like, I want all of my daughter. I want her in one. Like, why are you separating her again? Like, she's been separated. He cut her up. He did all this kind of, you're redoing this all over to her again. And I'm, like, literally sobbing at the end of this documentary. It was so sad, you know? And I'm like, I totally get it. Like, she's doing to her what has been done to her all along, forgotten and divided and split up and dismembered and on and on and on. And she's like, I just want her all in one place, all together. It's interesting because when the prosecutor tells her, you don't hear it behind, like, the scenes, but she says, Kathy wants to give you half the remains, and she goes the top half or the bottom half. And it's so profound when she says that. Like, I mean, it is so profound. I feel like I wrote some notes about this. Hold on a second. No, I don't think I did. I True Crime watched. But anyway, this documentary is so fantastically done. It was so well produced. It was so well put together. And I think one thing it proves is, I love a good 6 to 8 episode true crime series, but we don't need it. This was 2 episodes. It was fantastically done. It was conclusive. I love that a lot of the family members of Brenda and Dennis did not side with them, and were always looking out for Aundria to let us know that there were people in the family that did love her. I think is important. And that Kathy was so relentless. This documentary was so fantastically well done, and I really love that it honored both of the victims that had been murdered, but also, like, Meta and the other victims that, I mean, it told their stories as well, and really showed the truth about who Dennis Bowman and his wife Brenda were. It was fantastically done. Let me know what you thought about it in the comment section below. I love you guys, and I will see you tomorrow. Bye.